Alright, so the new iPads have generated an amazing discussion online about what iPadOS should be, how it can be improved, and whether, again, your iPad can replace your laptop. There have been a ton of suggestions about what iPadOS needs next, and after reading and hearing so many of them, I have some thoughts. Let's get into it. Oh, by the way, I'm not going to be coming at this from the perspective of a YouTuber or somebody who edits video. I recognize that like 90% of the people on the planet don't actually do that with iPad, so we're going to discount that. And this isn't going to be a video of me talking about how macOS should come to iPad. Apple has said repeatedly that they're not interested in doing that, and there's no indication that that has changed. So let's be a little bit more practical. So the first thing is a more effective notification center. Right now you can swipe down or use like the globe and N hotkey to access notifications pretty quickly, but you're left with a pretty empty space. You don't see any widgets, you just see the time and the notifications. This is pretty wild because they can do a lot more to make this a more efficient process, especially for pro users who are using iPads as their main device. They can combine Control Center and notifications so that you actually have more information on the screen. They can also make it a double-paned system where you have notifications on the left, and then if you click on them on the right, they open like a little bit more of an advanced preview that you can interact with. That doesn't pull you out of what you're currently doing, which might be word processing or drawing, etc. The second thing is to declunkify navigation. Now, that's not really a word, but it's something that describes using iPadOS pretty accurately. I type most of my scripts and do most of my thumbnails and photo work for these videos on iPad, but navigating it after coming from a laptop is a bit of a headache. Now, there are two parts to this. There is Stage Manager and then there's the cursor. Let's start with Stage Manager. Now, the idea of Stage Manager is great, allowing you to have like window support in a sense, but there are a few limitations. The first is that you can't swipe down to view all your apps like you can on a MacBook. I think that's a pretty easy feature to add, and I think a lot of us want to know what exactly is on our stage at a given time. Right now, you can't see everything, and there's no way to get an overview. The next, which doesn't make sense to me at all, is when you open a new app, even if you're in a current stage, it opens the new app in a new stage. If I'm reading an article and I have Safari open and Pages open and I open up my mail, chances are I want to do something that's related to what I'm currently looking at. I don't need mail to automatically bounce to a new stage. And there's all this like bouncy animation that just like kind of disrupts your workflow. And third, combining stages isn't that helpful either. If I open up a new app and I have 3 other apps that I want to combine with it, I can't just drag that set of 3 apps into the new stage that I'm on. I have to do it vice versa, where I open up the 3 apps and then I drag the 4th app onto it. That's like a small unnecessary hurdle that makes the navigation, again, a little bit clunkier than it needs to be. Okay, the second part of this navigation issue is the cursor. Now, I understand that iPad is a touch-based interface, but it's a generally pretty imprecise way of navigating. And even though the cursor snaps to objects like buttons and icons, and that can be helpful at times, it frequently overshoots and it's hard to gauge how much of a swipe or how much motion you need to implement in order for you to snap onto the target. I'm like constantly guessing as to how much I need to do it, and I frequently overshoot and then I miss the target and then I have to do it all over again. The other thing is to give us the option to change the cursor from a circle to a pointer, which gives us at least hopefully the illusion of being more precise. I understand that the touch target is going to be bigger, but having that would be easier for a lot of us, I think, to process what we're actually clicking and doing. Right now, it just feels kind of clunky. Okay, number 3 on the list is unifying the language. So my theory as to why a lot of tech reviewers are frustrated with iPad has to do with the fact that they're coming from a Mac and they're also likely using the iPad for like a week or less. If you think of learning iPadOS and macOS as learning 2 separate but related languages, then this makes a lot more sense. You can do similar things and reach similar endpoints, but the way you do it is different. It's like a communication gap after using macOS for such a long time and then suddenly going to iPadOS. People are expecting a one-to-one transition when that's really not the case. If you actually look through the shortcuts that are available, there are a ton of really nice, quick shortcuts that actually make navigating this device a lot faster and more effective. But we just don't know what they are a lot of the times. The other part of this whole thing is that shortcuts are not available in every single app. So some apps like Notes might have shortcut support, but Apple Pages, which is also an Apple app, doesn't have shortcut support. So my advice would be to unify the language a little bit, make the shortcuts a little bit more uniform or consistent. Also, bringing shortcuts to every app, at least the ones that Apple offers, can make the experience feel a lot more unified and more consistent across the devices. Now, I'm not sure if this is something that they overlooked, but keyboard shortcut support should be logical and it should be universal. Fourth on this list is the File app. Of course, many people have bemoaned the Apple iPadOS Files app for a long time. Like, I understand it's really outdated, really old. You can't really adjust the information density on the app. So like when you go into column view and you want to see the different bits of information and files you have, you can't always view the full titles, or the files themselves take up too much vertical space, more so than a touch target would even be, even if you're using your fingers. Allowing us to adjust a lot of these parameters to make the information a little bit denser would make this an easier app to use. And the final thing that I think Apple should think about is powering up the apps and the overall experience. Now, when iPad first came out, it was running on A series chips and it had very limited RAM and storage. And for those reasons, it made sense to dumb down apps on iPad because you're just getting a lighter version, you're having a lighter OS and a little bit of less power, so you can't necessarily do the same things that you could on a computer. That makes perfect sense, except they actually brought desktop class chips to the iPads in 2020. So now that you have M series chips, 16 gigs of RAM, terabyte or 2 terabyte of storage at the max spec, what's the power difference? Now, granted, a majority of iPad users will still be using the lower spec versions of the iPads, and so they won't necessarily have the power to run the full featured desktop class apps. But if you're talking specifically about pros, you should enable that sort of crosstalk or feature adjustment for the pro models or the appropriately spec'd versions. There is an increasing proportion of professionals and creatives who are turning to iPad as their primary or co-primary device, and they should be free to do what they want. Take, for example, someone in business school or in medicine. They likely only really need a desktop class number processor like Numbers or Excel to run maybe some research, some spreadsheets, of course, and they can probably be fine with an iPad because it can do pretty much everything else just as well as a computer. Coders also want Xcode or Terminal on iPad, and they've been asking for that for a while. This should be a priority to Apple, as not all pro users are animators, editors, or artists. Something that I've noticed across disciplines is that professionals are starting to branch out and become multi-talented. Technology has made it possible and easier to have your feet in both worlds, so to speak. Engineers are becoming artists, physicians are becoming YouTubers, and artists are becoming writers. iPad represents the peak of versatility. While sacrificing features for efficiency made sense back in the day, I don't believe that's a trade-off that still exists to the same degree, and the apps should reflect that. So, I have a confession to make. When I was writing the script and sitting down and thinking about what iPad could really do to be changed and improved, it was pretty hard. While there are definitely breakdowns and technical limitations to every workflow when you really get down to deep work, overall the experience on iPad has come a long way, and it's actually pretty capable for most things. I actually had to think long and hard about where improvements could be made, and a lot of them fell into the refinement category rather than a teardown and redesign category. Of course, every feature I mentioned with my iOS 18 wishlist still stand. You can hear my thoughts about that over here. The iPad's versatility is likely its greatest weakness. Users are coming from completely different vantage points about how they use the device, ranging from an initial spend of about $400 to upwards of $3,000. The versatility in price, form factor, and use cases makes this a really hard software to improve. And I think it's likely Apple's greatest challenge across their lineup of different software that they offer. I have the greatest respect and admiration for the engineers and software engineers working on iPad and iPadOS. This is not a problem I would want to have myself. So, as we look forward to WWDC and down the line, let us recognize the great work and hard work going into these softwares and how they're being improved despite the extreme amount of suggestions and feedbacks coming from completely different perspectives on how this device should work. And let's also continue to push for improvements that make us more effective and efficient with our devices. That's been it. If you learned something, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.